This music deserves to be played, and it deserves to be played well. That's the philosophy behind a series of recordings from the Catalyst Quartet. I'm Colleen Phelps, and this look behind the playlist, Catalyst Quartet member Abi Fayette on uncovering the music of Florence Price.
So tell me about the Uncovered project because this album is part of a larger whole. Tell us about that project.
So back in 2018, the quartet decided to sort of embark on this project after hearing our colleagues at the summer festival, the Sphinx Performance Academy that we teach at, performing these works by composers that we had never heard of before. And more importantly, these works that were, written at the same time, and as, other great composers like Elgar and sort of in the height of like the late 19th, early 20th century, where classical music really was really innovative and whatnot. But in 2018, we decided that wow, we want to not only perform this music because it deserves a place in the classical canon, but also record these works because when we looked for recordings, we couldn't find any, or the recordings that we did find were not really professional grade sort of quality in terms of, maybe they were not recorded in a studio or something like that. And so, the recordings that we did find, which are few and far between, weren't really very didn't really represent the quality of the work itself all the time. And so that sort of was the seed of the Uncovered project. And it became very fitting that we called this project the Uncovered project, because as we started to explore, we found more and more music, basically. That's kind of the gist of it. So what started off with being, the idea to just record one album of a few of these pieces that we had found has now turned into a multi-volume project, of which the most recent album features all the string quartet applicable works of Florence Price.
The act of uncovering this repertoire, I'm sure, holds its own set of obstacles. Even getting your hands on the music might be a challenge. What were some of the challenges you dealt with specifically for this Florence Price album?
Well, there's a few sort of aspects of that. First of all, we were very lucky to be in touch with the University of Arkansas, which currently houses her collection. And we were very, very lucky to be able to sort of get in touch with them and to be able to get access to her manuscripts. But, that in itself was a very long journey, sort of even just figuring out who to get permission from, who to reach out to. And of course, we're dealing with this all in the middle of the pandemic. So people not necessarily being in the physical library, and we certainly at the time couldn't go down to the library to look at them in person. So getting digital copies of that was a challenge. But we remember looking at sort of the catalog titles of her works, and one sort of thing in particular was the 5 folk songs and counterpoint, which was a piece that I think we can all say had been fairly well known, I guess, for Florence Price's works, had gone through several different iterations of title. So as you also know, as you see on the album, there's also a second set of folk songs called the Negro Folk Songs and Counterpoint. And the titles were switched, interchanged, mislabeled. There wasn't really any consistency. And it wasn't until we got the physical manuscript that we knew for sure that it was a different piece, that the Negro Folk Songs and Counterpoint was actually a different piece. So there was definitely a hold your breath moment where we're like, well, we're planning on there being the second work, but we have no idea whether or not it's actually going to, that's going to be the case. So that was one example, of having to get the music for a piece that, it's not published. It's not released we play off of the manuscript for that. And when I say manuscripts, what we got from the library in Arkansas was a mix of different source materials. And so some of the sources that we have, we believe to be kind of like handwritten first editions. And then also for some of the pieces, we also, in addition, have what we believe to be her physical like sketches and manuscripts. So there's a couple of different sources that we were able to pull from, but also not all of the pieces have all of that source material. So it's kind of juggling that as well. Another aspect to her music, which was kind of challenging to overcome, is we spent a lot of time digging through these first editions and sketches to find the right notes. Because of the few pieces that are published, they're not necessarily what I would call critical editions, for sure. And, you know, Schirmer is the publishing house that owns the rights to her music. And again, like, you know, we don't have centuries of performance tradition, of, you know, musicologist study and whatnot to sort of create critical editions. So Schirmer's kind of putting out the first published edition of her work. And so that's a journey, you know, on that for them to try to, you know, represent her music accurately, but also, you know, it's not always easy to get your hands on these sources, as I described. So we kind of had to go on our own journey with our source material to even just like figure out what the right notes were. So
The volume 1 of the project is music by Samuel Coleridge Taylor. Comparing the two, these are two really different life stories and two really different sets of challenges. But what were sort of the through lines that you faced between these two composers and uncovering their music?
well, I would definitely say that the biggest difference that's kind of obvious right off the bat is that Samuel Coleridge Taylor was very celebrated in his lifetime. His music was very well respected. It was performed frequently. He didn't really have the same struggles in his lifetime to get his music out there. Florence Price, on the other hand, despite a massive amount of success that she had during her lifetime, faced huge struggle. You know, she was the first African American woman to have her music played by a major American orchestra. But you know, you think about that, that's because she won fair and square competition, not because somebody saw the genius in her work and said, I want to play your symphony. She also lived an extremely tough personal life. She was in, you know, a not so great abusive relationship. She had to flee Arkansas because of the building violence and racial tensions in the South, and basically abandoned her home to migrate, as many African Americans did, to Chicago, which was a main place where a lot of people migrated to. And so she had these sort of little, sort of, you know, strong communities with other artists, other musicians, where they exchanged ideas and their music. You know, she had her music sort of probably read by people. We're not 100% sure how much of the music that's on the album was actually even performed like in a sort of premiered kind of sense. And, you know, that's kind of really tough to think about, because you think something that's so essential for a composer is hearing their work played. And then maybe you go back to the drawing board, you make some tweaks or whatever. And we're not 100% sure how much of that she actually had. There's very little documentation, period. So that's definitely a stark difference, I think, between Samuel Coleridge Taylor and Florence Price. One thing that I will say that's a really beautiful sort of similarity that we've found, not only between these two composers, but also as we've explored a lot of these other Black composers as well, is that the way that they pull from um, the music that was part of their sort of personal history or their cultural history, particularly spirituals and folk songs, songs that originated during plantation life, um, is really quite unique and innovative. And it's something that I feel personally really is a standout in terms of very distinct voices that these composers have. I mean, with Florence Price, you definitely hear very traditional, sort of romantic compositional style, but she manipulates it in such a way that like becomes so personal, which is really quite amazing. So she's innovative within the confines of something that's very traditional.
I actually want to jump off of that for this next question because the spirituals and folk songs, especially that she set, I've noticed from reading history of especially the Fifth Jubilee singers that those songs were not universally embraced by the Black community during her time. And especially spirituals, I know there was a sort of backlash at Fisk University to performing them because they were, to some, they were the songs of enslavement, and to some, they were songs of hope from that time. So there's a very mixed feeling, especially by Florence Price's time, that really wasn't there for someone like Samuel Coleridge Taylor, who got to hear one of the original tours. So I guess my question is, from playing those folk song arrangements, what can you tell about how Florence Price felt about those songs?
Well, I would say that even just choosing to create these counterpoint works based on these spirituals and folk songs, I feel like they held a very near and dear place in her heart. And she felt that they were very essential to her sort of um, culture in her life. I think when anybody chooses to take, folk song or spiritual and incorporate it and sort of manipulate and create it their own, it's sort of like, I want to take this popular tune and I want to make it my own, which to me shows a great and deep love and respect for the sort of history of that particular song. Now, I don't know whether or not certain of the folk songs, maybe she's embracing them because they represent great points of pain or celebration, those sort of two opposite ends. I think one could look at, if you look at the five folk songs in counterpoint, for example, the first movement, Calvary, is very turbulent. The way that the movement ends is in a very turbulent sort of, the harmonies get very crunchy and wild and crazy. And I wonder if that's her own manifestation of how she internalized that that song. Whereas Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, the final movement, has a lot of celebratory feeling, and it has a lot of joy and just happiness in it. So, I wonder if how she treats these songs and sort of manipulates them and bends them and sort of creates her own sort of world with them. One could look deeper and try to figure out what you're suggesting is where did these fit into her personally?
Was there any Florence Price music that you found and were interested in, but then weren't able to include either because there wasn't space or because you couldn't quite get your hands on an edition that worked?
Not that I'm aware of, actually, which I'm very happy to say. I mean, there is a piano quintet in E minor, which is supposedly lost. We would love to have gotten our hands on that music. Actually, this is an issue that we're currently working on, but for the company that creates that digitizes the track list and lists it, actually mistakenly labeled the shorter piano quintet, the one in G major, the piano quintet in E minor, and which, there's a lot, again, like I said, there's a lot of mislabeling that happens because there's a lot of contrary information out there on the internet. So if you Google like Negro folk songs and counterpoint, you might actually get the 5 folk songs and counterpoint. And that's kind of the same issue with this piano quintet. But it's, I mean, personally kind of hilarious just because there's not a shred of E minor in the whole piece. So if you had just turned it on and listened and knew anything, but, we understand that that's, we're trying to rectify that issue. And also, we understand that there are many, many degrees of separation between us as artists sending the track list and then how the person who actually inputs it into Spotify or Apple Music and stuff like that. So, that's neither here nor there. Hopefully it gets fixed. But the nice part about doing a digital release is that we're not restricted by length. And if we had released this on a CD, it would have been 2 discs CD. But we don't have to worry about that because when things are digital and online, like they can be as long as you want them to be. So we were really glad that we didn't have to pick and choose which pieces. And I think if it had come down to having to pick and choose, we would have just said however many CDs we need to make it work, because that's part of the goal of the project. Like we're not here to pick and choose the greatest hits of Florence Price. We're here to put her entire catalog into the world.
Actually, circling back to a bit of a music theory question, because I think, you're being listened to by people with music degrees and casual music listeners alike. And people might be wondering, what does it mean that the folk songs are in counterpoint? What is in counterpoint? Can you give a very basic explanation of that?
Yeah, so counterpoint is basically a method of composition. And very basically, it's about how 2 independent lines interact with each other. So basically, at its most fundamental sort of iteration, you have one sort of bass line. So, for people who maybe are not as well versed in classical music, that's the cello. That's typically a bass voice, so a cello, or you can think the left hand on the piano is playing a line, and then you have sort of melody on top of it that is influenced by the direction of the bass line. So they sort of interact with each other, and you can have, well, I mean, ideally, you could have an infinite number of these on top of the bass melody lines. So that are all interacting with each other. So obviously, the more lines you have, the more complex it becomes. But this was a compositional style that was very distinctive of the Baroque era. So think Johann Sebastian Bach, probably the composer that people know, have the most familiarity with. But that was sort of the compositional style at that time.
So while we know you're subject to what's available and what can be found, who else? Well, first of all, who else do you plan to uncover in your next volumes so far?
So our next volume, which is volume 3, will feature the music of William Grant Still and Coleridge Taylor Perkinson and George Walker.
Can you just say a little bit about who each of these people were? Very short.
Yeah. So William Grant Still was, considered, really well respected composer in the 20th century. He's a little later than Florence Price. And his string quartet is kind of character portraits of 3 friends. It's called the Lyric Quartet. And then George Walker, probably one of the most well-known, unfortunately recently deceased African-American composers of his generation. Probably most famous for his comparison to Samuel Barber in terms of his Lyric Quartet, which we'll be recording because of the very famous slow movement, which had been separated and is often performed as a standalone work. And then Coleridge Taylor Perkinson, who also did not die that long ago. He passed away in 2004. He, to me, is like kind of the, not to say odd man out, but he kind of is the most diverse in terms of his career. He wrote for film, TV, wrote music for ballet. He was very close with Alvin Ailey, like Dance Company. He was a very well-respected jazz musician. And he shares a little bit of a connection to Samuel Coleridge Taylor. His mother named him after him. So there's a nice little connection there. And also William Grant Still and Florence Price attended the same elementary school in Little Rock, which was probably one of the first places that sort of started to foster their music creativity. This elementary school in Little Rock, which had a very successful sort of music program, which is a nice little tie in there as well.
Gotta love the advocacy for music education there.
Of course.
Okay, and then so that's who's planned next. Who have you thought, wow, I'd really like to uncover some of their music, but it might be a little tricky?
Well, looking forward, there is one composer that, at this point, we've been going a little bit unintentionally in chronological order. But for volume 4, we want to jump back to the classical era and record the entire catalog of Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges. Well, there are many string quartets he wrote. We know that there are many, he wrote them in sort of sets because they're very short quartets. Each quartet consists of 2 movements. And so he wrote them in sort of sets of 6, which is not something that was uncommon. If you look at Haydn's quartets, Mozart quartets, that's sort of how the sort of old days marketing kind of was. It's like, oh, like I wrote another set of 6 string quartets to sell. Like we have our hands on one set, but we have no idea where the other, I believe, and I might be getting this wrong, but I believe there are at least 2 more sets, and we have no idea where they are. So that is, we are actively working on that. And if anybody listening to this has any idea where the mysterious Joseph Boulogne string quartet sets are, please let us know. We're happy to take any leads. But I think that's really our next big challenge. Also with him, all of his music is over in Paris, in France, we believe. So, contrary to what the journey was to sort of track down Florence Price's music, she's in our own backyard. I mean, the United States, we have a lot of contacts here. We have a lot of people that we can sort of talk to sort of get information. But now we're going to have to take our attention over to France um, to try to track some of this music down, which, well, I mean, it's going to be an adventure for sure.
Okay, so point of view, you're a college student or even maybe an enthusiastic high school student, and you think, I don't want to play just Mozart quartets, or I don't want to play just the rep that everybody says, that's on all the old rep lists.
Right.
I want to do something different, but I'm not, I don't have a grant to go get it from a library in Arkansas or Paris. Where do you suggest that person start?
Well, I think what's good is that this music is starting to be formally published. Some of it is published, though. I mean, the William Grant Still Quartet is published and is available. The George Walker Quartet is also published. There are some Florence Price works that are published. Like I said, the Five Folk Songs of Counterpoint, the Piano Quintet in A minor, the String Quartet in A minor are published, although those have, to put it simply, note issues. But another piece that people might not think of is, Samuel Coleridge Taylor's Fantasy Sugar is available on IMSLP. And, for anybody that doesn't know IMSLP, it's an incredible resource that every musician leans on heavily for access to music that's in public domain. And so you can find his Fantasy Sugar online and, explore. I mean, IMSLP is a wealth of just music. I mean, you could spend a lifetime going through all of this music that's in public domain and looking for things. Once we have sort of completed the recording aspect of our Uncovered project, one thing that we're very interested in is either creating and putting out there our own editions of some of these or all of these works, or working with publishing houses that have already published these works and sort of working with them to create critical editions so that we can really sort of incorporate all of the work and research that we've done to make the music I guess I would say to kind of create a score that we feel is more representative of what these composers intended. So that's a more far off goal, but that is definitely something that we're thinking about actively and hoping to do.
Uncovered Volume 2, featuring the music of Florence Price, is available wherever you get music, and you'll, of course, hear it on WUOL.